This pre-KVK is insane. To the millions of gems, to the centuries of speed-ups, to the hundreds of thousands if not millions of dollars spent to train these troops, 1960 has come out on top. For those that missed it, here's a recap of the crazy shenanigans that happened in the past pre-KVK. As all pre-KVKs do, we started off with the Marauder stage. In all honesty, especially in big Imperium KVKs such as this one, Marauders don't really mean too much. 1093, one of the most active KDs in the game, one of the only 2 Alliance Kingdoms left in the game, came out blazing in the Marauder stage with 168 million points. We had 1606 at a close 105 million points, and the rest of the kingdoms not even breaking a million pre-KVK points, to where 1960 was even in 8th place at 40 million pre-KVK points for Marauders. That's because there isn't really a reason to do Marauders in 2025 anymore. Even though you might get a bit more speed-ups for 5 Marching Marauders versus 5 Marching Barbarians in KVK, the main reason why people prefer to do Barbarians is for the crystal technology. If you want to talk about the amount of points Marauders give as a whole in pre-KVK, all of that gets eclipsed in the training stage, especially in these big Imperium kingdoms. Now that we're done talking about the Marauder stage, let's start talking about the training stage. Going into the training stage, the general sentiment was that it was going to be a bloodbath. 1960, 2377 are 2 of the strongest kingdoms in the game, as well as some of the biggest spenders in the game. With the 2 billion power Krakens, Mr. Hope, and Wildline being in this KVK in 2377, as well as Addy and Prodigo, and many others in 60 GT, this training stage was shaping up to be one of the most hype that I've seen in a while. 60 GT started the training stage at 21 billion power. On the other side of things, 2377 started the training stage at 24 billion power. When reset hit, it all came down to the runes. 1960 was only able to get a 10% rune, but 2377 were able to come out with a coveted 15% training rune. Now 5% training speed not might sound like much, but in a case like this, where you're spending millions of gems, thousands of days of speed ups, you want to make sure that you are as efficient as possible to make sure that you get as much training as you can. The 60 GT training buff started around reset, where a bunch of players started training troops. Even only having the 10% rune, people were still dedicated to 1, ranking pre-KVK, but 2, just getting troops in general for this crazy KVK coming up ahead. I even started training a little bit, as my goal was to train 7 million power to get 100 million power overall. In terms of Duke in 1960, you had to be training an astronomical amount of troops in pre-KVK to get into the list. The first person on the list in 1960 for Duke is Addy. Addy is a well-known player in 1960, as she is one of the rocks, honestly, in the 60 GT community. She's consistently one of the top performers, getting a ton of KP and swarming down a lot of things to get a lot of deads, and let's just say she had a lot of gems to spare. 20 million to be exact, as well as a ton of speed ups to supplement the gem training. You can see here that she's gemming 1,440 troops, and that is because it takes exactly 1 day to train that many troops, being as gem efficient as she possibly could be. Before she started training, Addy was at 485 million power, and after all the training and gemming, she's now at 100 million power, gaining 315 million power during this pre-KVK training stage. Next, we had a familiar name on the channel, Prodigo. If you guys don't remember, Prodigo also trained on stream last pre-KVK, where he spent 27 million gems in one go. But they still had 11 million gems to spare for this pre-KVK, which is actually very impressive, seeing that 960 actually went in first pop. The fact that 1960 didn't skip anything during KVK, literally as migration opened, we also went into a pop as well, makes this pre-KVK push by Prodigo super impressive, because not only the speed ups but the gems used was pretty much all gained between last pre-KVK and this pre-KVK. Meaning that these 11 million gems that Prodigo is spending right now was pretty much gained in 2 months. Prodigo started off his pre-KVK push using expansions. You can see the clip now, slowly but surely going through the training speeds, making sure that they used, I think they used 300 or 420k expansions for this push, which is absolutely insane. But shortly after they used expansions, they went straight into gemming. Yet again, only having a 10% rune in 60 GT, the magic number for gemming troops was 1,440. If you're trying to gem troops at home, the magic number will depend on how much training speed you have. Ultimately, you want to try to get as close to 1 day of speed ups as possible. And in this case, for our pre-KVK, is 1,440 gems per click. Prodigal started at 643 million power before he started training for Pre-KVK, and ended off at 844 million power, training pretty much exactly 200 million power for this Pre-KVK. After Addy and Prodigal trained, Duke was given to Glock. Glock is a new name on the channel, but definitely a well-known name in the Rise of Kingdoms community. Glock also spent some time training with expansions at first, using about 100 or so expansions throughout the training process, but majority of the time, Glock was using his 9 million gems to gem train. Actually, one of the funniest moments on the stream was when Glock was training his troops, but then the troop commanders kept walking in front of the training buildings, blocking him from training. If Sun Tzu, Boudica, and Julius Caesar pretty much just always blocking where he wanted to click, to the point where he even had to move his training buildings out of the way. Before training, Glock was at 423 million power, but after training, Glock was at 560 million power, so overall gaining 138 million power during the Pre-KVK training stage. With all that, 960 had a great first day of training. A ton of whales and a ton of people pitching in to make sure that our Pre-KVK training scores were pretty high and to make sure that they had enough troops for KVK. However, 2377 was not inactive though. Specifically, Mr. Hope and Wildline both pushed around 300 million power. I believe they started at around 2.2 billion power overall and finished the first day of the Pre-KVK training stage at 2.5 billion power. By the end of the first day, 1960 and 2377 both were neck and neck, less than 100 million points away from each other. And that was it for the first training buff. After that, both kingdoms patiently waited for the second training buff. Although, in 1960, a lot of people trained with their farms. By the time the second training buff was coming around, 960 actually made a 400 million point gap between us and 2377. 960 was at 3 billion Pre-KVK points versus 2377 was at 2.6 billion. Talking about farms, Ahmad Aziz's farms this Pre-KVK went off. In between buffs, they trained 50 million power, making their Pre-KVK score a whopping 100 million points within the top 10 of Pre-KVK. Unfortunately, during the second buff, 960 only had a 10% rune, so yet again missing 5% training speed that could have been given with a 15% rune. Nonetheless, players like Genie, Raish, Piltong, Osno, D-Ace, Redline, and Boom 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 made sure that the 960 Duke title was fully utilized during the 4-hour training buff. After the second training buff, 1960 was at 4.8 billion Pre-KVK score, while 2377 was at 3.6 billion. Wildline and Mr. Hope did train again, both gaining approximately 100 million power, but that was negated by the community of 1960, who made sure that there was always someone training with the Duke title. Actually, by the end of the second buff, Ahmad Aziz's farm, which we referenced earlier, went up to 302 million Pre-KVK points. And if all of that was training, that would equate to 150 million power trained, making them 5th overall by the end of the second buff. At the start of the third and final buff, 960 continued to gain the lead. 960 was at 5.1 billion Pre-KVK score, while 2377 was at 3.8 billion, making a difference of 1.3 billion Pre-KVK score. That 1.3 billion though was not exactly safe. See, 1960 have been unlucky with the runes, getting a 10% last time, 10% this time, and just when we thought our luck couldn't get worse, it did. Because this last buff, the most important buff some might say, 960 only had a 7% training rune. That coupled with Wild Lion and Mr. Hope saying that they're both going to be training 300 million points each, making them 3 billion power overall and getting 1.2 billion Pre-KVK score overall, really kept everyone on their toes and made the lead feel like it wasn't safe. Because of that, a lot of people continued pushing, including myself, where I pushed another 3 million power so I could reach my goal of 100 million power overall. I was able to reach my goal and finally obtain the Kraken achievement after playing the game for 5 years. Yes, this was the first time that I reached 100 million power, so hopefully that means I don't have to train in the middle of fighting. As reset and the end of training stage grew closer and closer, so was the realization that 2377 was not going to push, and that 960 has secured the Pre-KVK. In all honesty, this was a fun experience, super hype, and everyone was interested to see who would train. But in the grand scheme of the KVK, does it really matter if you get the 3% all damage versus the 2% all damage? It's only a 2 all damage difference where you're taking 1% away from your enemy, you're getting 1 from yourself. But I don't think this pre-KVK will make or break the KVK overall. It's just some bragging rights and a small morale win for what looks like a marathon of a war. We are now less than 10 hours away before the KVK opens as I was recording this video, and 960 still has a lead at 6 billion pre-KVK points. Second place is 2377 at 4.6 billion, and third place is 1093 at 3.2 billion. Be sure to subscribe to the channel as I will be covering everything about this KVK, streaming it as much as possible, creating recap videos as much as possible, and be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it. I'll catch you guys later. Peace!